What is your reaction to the Trump presidency?
That's the choice, actually. That was the choice of the American people. So our principled position, I mean China's principled position is that we don't make too many comments on other countries' internal affairs. But of course, this is an issue. This is an issue that has a lot of interest worldwide. According to our view, what we attach most importance is what kind of implications it might have on the China-American relationship. This is one of the most important bilateral relationships worldwide. And in the past 4 decades, both China and the United States and this region, I mean the Asia-Pacific region, and the world at large, all benefit a lot from this good bilateral relationship. So we are looking forward an ever better bilateral relationship, but that needs joint efforts from both sides.
You say you're looking forward to a better relationship.
I hope so.
Do you expect there will be a better relationship?
That needs joint efforts on both sides. You know that actually, if you look back to the past 4 decades, when a new presidency came into office, you could always find that sometimes there were some ups and downs in this bilateral relationship. But in general, if you look back to the past 4 decades, it moves upward. So we hope that could still be the tendency during the Trump presidency.
But if you look at what Trump has said and tweeted, it is not encouraging, or one would think it is not encouraging from the Chinese perspective. Just look at what Trump has said and tweeted in the past. May 2016 at a rally, "We can't let China rape our country." He tweeted, "Did China ask us if it was okay to devalue the currency, heavily tax our products into the country, to build a massive military complex in the middle of the South China Sea? I don't think so." And it goes on and on.
For all those statements or comments, I believe you have already heard official response from the Chinese Foreign Ministry through our spokesman, spokeswoman, or from the other government officials. But usually, as you might have already know, usually we don't make very many comments on those campaign words in the United States. What we really attach importance is to the real policies once he comes into the Oval Office. So we looked very closely his comments during his inauguration speech. We followed very closely of all the policy that have already been officially stated on the White House website ever since he goes into the White House.
So you were able to look past some of the inflammatory comments during the campaign?
But we have already made our official positions very clearly. For example, on the currency issue, actually, his words, I mean the words from him and his team, from the president and his team during the campaign, even aroused some controversy at home in the United States. That was not an issue in the China-American bilateral trade or economic ties. And on our part, even from the very top level, Chinese President Xi Jinping just said last week, actually in Davos, that on our part, we never have this kind of intention to try to boost our trade advantages or trade competitiveness through devaluing our renminbi currency. That's not our policy.
But just so that I understand, China was able to understand some campaign comments, but is China more concerned about what he says now that he is president?
Of course. That's the official position from the US government now.
So,
and that said, I really didn't mean that we just let pass or let go whatever him and his team have already said during the campaign. Some issues which we believe are quite important issues or at the cornerstone of this bilateral relationship, we have already made our positions very clearly.
What is China's objective in the South China Sea? What are your goals?
Basically 2 dimensions. First, of course, as any other countries, China is entitled to protecting or preserving the sovereignty and the territorial integrity, our own national core interests. And secondly, join hands together with all the countries in the region. China is committed to preservation of the peace, stability, and the safety of this region.
You maintain that this is Chinese territory and China can do what it wishes.
Well, just like the United States, you might wish to do anything that you believe necessary on your own territory. So China is no exception.
Is there any flexibility on that, or is that a locked in 100% position?
If that's the principled position, I think that applies to all the countries. But we are also aware that I know what you mean to hear. We are also aware that there are some controversies. For example, there are also a couple of other sovereign claimants in this region. And what to our pleasure, actually, to our comfort, countries have already come back to the original agreement that maybe for the time being we could set aside those sovereign disputes and focus on some joint developments and working together to maintain the peace and the stability in this region.
So you'd be willing to negotiate on it?
Well, not negotiating on sovereignty, that's not something negotiable, but negotiate on how to maintain the peace and the stability on the region.
You talked about an increased concern or increased importance placed to comments from the administration now that it is the official administration of the United States. The press secretary yesterday said, "We are going to make sure," and this is a quote, "that we defend international territories from being taken over by one country." And he was talking about the islands in the South China Sea. "We are going to make sure we protect our interests there."
Mm-hmm. I look at his words. The first point I should stress is that we are carrying out those constructions on China's own territory. So I don't think there is a conflict there. Concerning the interests...
But there is a conflict there. He's
well,
saying that
that's
this
not
is
a
international
conflict.
territory and we're going to make sure to defend international territory.
Concerning those islands, I think he refers to the construction on the islands. But concerning those islands, I don't think he's in the position to say that that's international territory. Although there might be different or controversial claimants over the sovereignty over those islands, but that's not for the United States. That might be between China and some other countries in this region.
So you're saying it's none of the United States' business?
No, I said that that's not the United States territory or the international territory as he mentioned.
You're saying there's a dispute over it.
Yeah, there's a
because
dispute.
There's a number of claimants.
Yeah, there's a dispute, but that's between China and several other countries in this region. And how to solve or maintain or handle those disputes, we have already come to our own agreements. Because we believe that this kind of practice or this kind of approach that will serve the interests, common interests of both China and all the other countries in this region. We hope that countries from outside could respect the common interests and the common wish of the country in this region. And concerning interests, I can tell you that China and the countries in this region might have more interests or more interests than the United States and some other countries from outside. Because you know that we are countries in this region and we care more than anyone else about the safety, security, peace and stability in this region.
Would China go to war to protect its interests in the South China Sea?
My ambassador in Washington, D.C. have already said that we have no interest to get involved in any war, trade war or any other war.
Well, speaking of trade war, do you think that's coming?
We don't want that, but it's not only up to us. That needs efforts from both sides. I mean, I understand you refer to between China, the trade between China and the United States, am I right?
Yeah. This whole interview right now, I'm talking about
okay.
China and the United States, because throughout his campaign and now into his presidency, he's talked about, and his administration has talked about, China. How China has unfair deals, how China doesn't allow goods into this country, and is said in one rally, we can't let China rape our country. Can't be more explicit than that.
Richard, I've already told you that actually there have been some comments during his campaign. But in the past 48 hours, ever since he goes into the White House, actually, we still wait the official positions from the Donald Trump administration on China. So even on this trade issue, we believe that actually, you see that in the past 4 decades, the trade volume between China and the United States have already exceeded from some 250 million in the very beginning, in the late 1970s, to some 550 billion the year before last year. So of course, that was partially because of the joint efforts from both sides, from the government encouragement and from the business and the commercial sectors, the joint efforts. But also partially that was the market force.
But what he said in the campaign, he seems to be moving quite quickly, already very quickly.
On TPP?
He's taken the U.S. out of the TPP negotiations.
Yeah.
So very quickly he pulled out of the TTP negotiations. What's China's response to that?
You mean on TPP or on the implications for China-U.S. trade relationship?
Well, let's talk about the TPP.
Okay. When TPP was...
No, the fact that he pulled out. You know, what's your response to the fact that
China was not a part of TPP. And in the very beginning, when it was first...
it was a trade pact here in Asia. It was...
Well, from the very beginning, when it was first tabled by the Republicans, by the Bush administration in the late 2008, China has made our official positions quite clear. Basically, or in principle, we welcome any kind of efforts, approach that might help the economic integration in this region, in the Asia-Pacific region. But you know that in the past 8 years, we follow very closely whether that could help the economic integration in this region. A little bit unfortunate is that actually sometimes government officials or leaders in the United States, they try to take China as a topic when they discuss, when they negotiate with their partners in TPP. This is something we don't like. Don't take TPP as a kind of, TPP as a kind of geopolitical tool. Just focus on the economic integration arrangements.
China must be pleased, though, that TPP looks like it's on a path to being finished.
If you say we are pleased, not because that might be a failure for any effort for the economic regional integration, but because we found some fault or found something that's not suitable, does not fit the real conditions in this region. For example, when China calls for RCEP, this kind of free trade arrangements among this region, we always bear in mind the difference among the economic conditions among all the economies in this region. So we believe that you should give some level of or degree of comfort for the economies in this region. That might help people coming together, instead of just imposing on some standards that might only serve the interests of several or individual economies.
You said China doesn't want a trade war. Does China think a trade war could be coming with the U.S.?
We are not prejudging anything, but I can tell you that while we have to prepare for the bad to protect our national or legitimate national interests, but we always try our best for the good.
What does preparing for the bad mean?
Well, we hope that through negotiation or through discussion, we could enhance the awareness from both sides that try to continue the policies or the basic framework that of the trade, the China-US economic ties and the trade ties that have served the interests on both sides. That will be good.
Well, help us enhance the awareness. What's at stake if there is a trade war?
Facts and figures have already shown that. I just show you. For example, even just for example, like the year last year or the year before last year, according to the statistics from the USCBC, I mean that I should acknowledge that this China-US economic bilateral ties also helped China in the past 4 decades. Help China to get involved in globalization, help China to, for example, to learn a lot from the American business and manufacturing sectors, but that also helped the United States a lot. As I told you, for example, just according to the statistics from the USCBC last year, even just last year, a single year, China-US trade or economic ties helped to create 2.6 million jobs in the United States a year alone. That also helped to contribute to about 1.2% of the GDP in the United States. And also, you know that actually, because of this trade, the average price of their commodities for the average American households has been decreased a lot. And that will help each American household in the year 2015 to save around $850 every year.
So you're saying if there's a trade war, the U.S. economy goes down and goods get more expensive
that
in
serves
the U.S.
no one interest. That will only do harm on both sides. If you look back, a real example, that was in the year 2009, the very famous Thai case. At that time, the Obama administration imposed additional tariffs on all the Thais imported from China. What was the result? Of course, the excuse had been that actually that might help to increase the employment in the United States in this Thai manufacturing sector. But what was the real result? Just in the following year, employment in this sector, I mean the Thai manufacturing sector, decreased by 10%. And all the benefits accrued to foreign Thai producers instead of the American indigenous producers. And at the same time, that adds about 1.1 billion US dollars additional cost to the average American household. So I don't think the trade war will serve the interests of any side.
How would China respond if the U.S. takes more steps, if President Trump takes more steps to recognize Taiwan?
I'm not here to prejudge anything, but we made our positions very clear. 2 points. First, this one China policy has been at the cornerstone or has been the fundamental basis for China-American relationship in general and for the cooperation between China and the United States on a wide range of important issues. So this is very important. Second, because this issue touches upon China's core interests, by no means this is something that could be negotiated or as a bargaining chip.
And you think President Trump wants to use this as a bargaining chip, or are you just warning him not to even think about it?
I'm not going to speak for him, but I think it's important for us to make our positions clear.
And that position is no negotiations?
It's not for negotiation.
That one China policy is
no
cornerstone of Chinese interests?
And also touch upon China's core interests. China's core interests.
So that sounds like it's as there's no room for discussion from your perspective on that.
One China policy.
100%.
100%.
North Korea. Many in the U.S., let's keep it on Trump. Trump has said that China can do much more to rein in North Korea. Is China doing all that it can to contain this very volatile and very dangerous regime?
It seems that on this issue alone, President Trump was on the same page with President Obama. But I can tell you, the very reason And the key or the crucial issue, the crux of the nuclear issue on the Korean Peninsula was not originated from China. It was an issue originated from the disputes between DPRK and the United States. And Rachel, you just told me that you've been to DPRK. Whenever you talk to people there, you might feel that they would like to talk to the American officials more than talk to the Chinese officials on this issue. And it's my understanding that discussions between Washington and Pyongyang have always been there. On the part of China.
China has undoubtedly influence over North Korea. Do you think China will do more to prevent what could be a dramatic military escalation, even a war on the Korean Peninsula?
China has influence. The United States has more influence, I can tell you. If you look at, and if you look back, China have made our own efforts. DPRK is our neighbor, close neighbor. Of course, we care much more than anybody else about any implications. For example, their development of the nuclear weapons and any kind of instability or the word, as you just mentioned, the war that might break out on the Korean Peninsula. That will have impacts, negative impacts on China. So we care much more than anybody else. And we try our efforts on this. But our very purpose is to find a feasible way to get this issue resolved rather than any other political agenda. So that's why, from experience, we draw to the conclusion that we have to get a balance on our policy. First, China is committed to the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Second, China is committed to the preservation of the peace and stability on the peninsula. Third, we still believe only negotiations, peaceful negotiations, is relevant to solve this issue.
Trump has said repeatedly that China isn't doing enough to rein in North Korea. One of his tweets, China has been taking out massive amounts of money and wealth from the U.S. in totally one-sided trade and won't help on North Korea. Nice. January 2017.
We've already talked about the trade issue. On this DPRK issue, if you look back to the history, in the past decade, at which point DPRK come to the agreement, commitment to abandon its nuclear weapon system and the programs. And they observe their commitment. They carry out practical measures to denuclearize. That was exactly after the September 19 agreement among all the six-party talks. So actually, that was a credit you should give to China. China initiated that, China helped that, but what about the others? For example, the United States, just because of some incidental issue, a couple of months after this September 19th agreement, parties broke away from this framework. It was very, very unfortunate. Until now, you even couldn't find any other framework that could be competitive to that one.
But frankly, I'm not hearing from you sort of a big commitment from China to try and rein in North Korea. You're saying the U.S. has more influence, the U.S. should do it, China's doing what it can. We have a very volatile leader in North Korea who may launch very soon intercontinental ballistic missiles and escalate tensions dramatically, very soon.
I say DPRK, I say the U.S., I say a lot about the U.S. because, as I said in the very beginning, the United States is the key to this issue. Secondly, whether China has done anything. China, not like the United States, we never believe in any unilateral actions or sanctional measures. So if you look at all the resolutions adopted by the Security Council of the United Nations, without China, that's not possible. And those very stringent sanction regimes imposed on DPRK was a kind of common agreement between China and the United States. I can tell you, the US administration, the US government appreciated a lot on China's efforts on that. Of course, I should repeat again, we never agree any sanction regimes outside the UN Security Council because we still stick to the multilateralism.
Going back to the core of this interview, which is the reason I flew out here to Beijing, and thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. President Trump has now been in office for a few days. What's your impression so far?
Well, that was already a question raised by the media here. If you look at his inauguration speech and the websites outline the policy issues of the Trump administration, mostly are still focused on domestic issues at home. So actually, it's for the American public to make comments. It's not for us to make comments. But worldwide, many people were quite interested or keen on his slogan, America First. My personal opinion, it's fair for President Trump to place the American national interests at the top of his agenda. That might be the case for any other state leaders. All the state leaders should place the interests of its own people, its own public, at the top of the agenda. No problem. But the problem is that today's world is quite interdependent. Countries are quite interconnected. So while trying to pursue the interests of your own country, maybe we have to bear in mind the implications worldwide. And this kind of implications might come back to the policy issues at your own home.
To come back and haunt you, you mean? To come back and create problems at home?
That could be the case. For example, the United States, its economy. I understand that President Trump would like to create more jobs at home, but on the other hand, you have also to observe the market force. Just like between China and the United States, the increase or the expansion of the trade volume between China and the United States partially was because of the efforts, joint efforts from both sides, from both governments and the commercial sectors, and partially that was a result of the market force.
Going back to your Thai example.
That's a good example, am I right?
It is. So you think that there's going to be, in his America First policy, that there could be some efforts to increase tariffs on China. If tariffs are imposed on China, will China immediately respond with tariffs on American goods?
China and the US were already members of the WTO. So within the WTO framework, there are already some rules governing this kind of disputes. And I don't want to specify here, but it's not very difficult for any people to get a conclusion what kind of reaction might be from the Chinese side. That said, I still want to reiterate that we don't want to see this kind of scenario. That will do harm on both sides. That will serve no one, neither's interest.
And before I let you go, just one other thing, because you said that his speech, his inauguration speech, was primarily domestic in focus. It was about America first, and well, frankly, every country in theory puts its own interests first. That's not unusual. But very early on, almost immediately, his press secretary came out and was talking about China and how China's activities in the South China Sea, that you're expanding into international territory, and I'll read the quote again. We're going to make sure, this is the press secretary, that we defend international territories from being taken over by one country. He means China taking over territory in the South China Sea.
I already told you that. That's not international territories. That's Chinese territories. And if you continue to say that, if you keep on saying that, but there are disputes over the sovereignty over those islands, That's a kind of dispute between China and several other countries in this region. That's not between China and the United States.
But sounds like the United States is making it its problem.
That's our concern in the past couple of years. You see that actually the sovereign disputes over those islands came out only in the 1970s. Before that, China's sovereign claims over those islands have never been disputed by anybody else, whether within this region or from outside. But ever since the 1970s, mid-1970s, some other couple of countries came out and said that they also have some sovereign disputes over these islands. Even that was the case, in the past 4 decades, China and countries in this region, we have succeeded in maintaining, in general, the disputes in this region and maintaining the peace and the stability in this region. Things changed only when the Obama administration carried out the so-called rebalancing policy in this area. So now, last year, China and the countries in this region, we have already come back to the agreement that first, we might try to solve those disputes or handle those disputes through those directly concerned countries. On the other hand, China and ASEAN countries, we should work together to preserve the peace and the stability in this region. We come back to this agreement because we believe that that serves our own interest in this region. So we hope that whether it's the United States or any other country from outside the region, please respect the common desire and the common wish and the common interest of the country in this region.
And finally, does China have a message for Donald Trump and Donald Trump supporters now that he is President of the United States?
China-American relationship is very important. It's important for China. I acknowledge that. It's also important for the United States. It's also important for the region and for the world at large. And basically, we would like to have a stable development of the China-American relationship, free from conflict or confrontation, based on mutual respect and aimed at win-win cooperation.
You want stability, you want normalcy, and you don't want conflict.
We don't want, definitely. I don't think the American public wants conflict between China and the United States. That's unfortunate.
Whether it's some sort of military confrontation or trade conflict or any kind of conflict.
I fully agree with you.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate your time.
Hey, NBC News fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.